Hi, I'm Garrett Ryan, the Told in Stone guy. Last week, I released a video called 7 Roman Buildings Hidden in Plain Sight, which people seemed to really enjoy. Several commenters asked for a sequel, and, being the obliging YouTube personality that I am, I made one. So, without any further ado, 7 more Roman buildings hidden in plain sight. There are literally thousands of Roman buildings, hiding more or less discreetly in cities and villages across the Mediterranean world. I chose the 7 in this video for the convenience of those staying in Rome. 3 of the buildings are located in or near the Eternal City. The other 4 are within easy day-tripping distance. We'll start with one of these outliers. Number 7. Santa Maria della Rotonda. For more than 2,000 years, the Alban Hills have been a refuge from the Roman summer. When the air grew heavy and the mosquitoes swarmed and the sky became a burning mirror, Romans who could afford to do so fled the sweltering city. The Alban Hills were a special favorite of the Roman elite. You can see them from the Dome of St. Peter's, a dark line on the southern horizon, marching over the haze and tile roofs of the city. As you draw closer, the line resolves into a range of steep hills, cloaked with groves of oak and pine. Only when you reach their summits, however, do you discover the hill's greatest treasures, the cool and placid lakes of Nemi and Albano. Along the shores of Lake Albano sprawls the sleepy town of Castel Gandolfo, famous since the Renaissance as the summer residence of the popes. The papal villa, which recently opened to tourists, is well worth a visit, but we're more interested in the ruins that emerge from the gardens and groves around it. In the late 1st century, the Emperor Domitian built a villa where Castel Gandolfo now stands. It was a grandiose structure, ringed by vast gardens with monumental fountains and a private theater. Fragments dot the grounds of the papal villa: huge water tanks, long subterranean service tunnels, a lakeside grotto sparkling with mosaics. But the best preserved remnant lies just outside the gardens, in the neighboring town of Albano. There, off a pleasant Renaissance piazza, is the little church of Santa Maria della Rotonda. From the front, it looks quaint but undistinguished, with the portico and campanile of 100 other Italian churches. But step inside, and you find yourself beneath a dome of Roman concrete. A 20th century restoration removed later incrustations, revealing the curving walls and Roman brickwork of the original structure. The building clearly stood on the grounds of Domitian's villa, but its original purpose is unclear. The prevailing theory is that it was either part of an elaborate fountain or a room of the emperor's private bath complex. Either way, a surprising past for an unassuming village church. Number 6. Sant'Urbano alla Caffarella. There are few better ways to spend an afternoon in Rome than by strolling down the Via Appia, the ancient highway that connected Rome to Brindisi. Once you get beyond the major catacombs, the road is almost always empty, running arrow straight beneath whispering umbrella pines. Most of the ruins along the road are tombs, legacies of the days when Rome's greatest families lined the consular highways with their eternal mansions. Here and there, the gaunt brick skeleton of a villa looms over a greening field. And, down a byway that branches from the ancient road, almost concealed by pines, is the little brick church of Sant'Urbano. The church is seldom visited, both because it's well outside the city and because it's almost never open. But the intrepid few who venture out to it find themselves in a landscape scattered with the ruins of one of the Roman Empire's greatest villas, the estate known as Triopion, owned by the awesomely wealthy senator Herodes Atticus. The building that now houses Sant'Urbano stood on the grounds of Herodes' estate. Originally, it was a small temple built either by Herodes or by one of his heirs. Since no unambiguous evidence survives, the deity to whom the temple was dedicated is unknown. The candidates most often suggested by scholars are Ceres and Bacchus. Whomever it honored, the temple was converted into a church sometime in the Middle Ages, and has served in that capacity more or less continuously for the past millennium. Although the front porch has been filled in, the temple is almost entirely preserved, lacking only a few ornamental details. The original stucco work of the interior is still intact, offering visitors a rare glimpse into a virtually unchanged Roman interior. Let's hope that this overlooked building becomes more accessible in the near future. Number 5. The Duomo of Terracina. The city of Terracina is about 35 miles, or 60 kilometers, south of Rome, ranged dramatically along a promontory where the foothills of the Apennines jut into the sea. Terracina has many Roman remains, from the Cyclopean terraces of the cliff-top temple of Jupiter Anxur to the great rock cutting, 130 Roman feet deep, by which the Via Appia entered the city. The central piazza of medieval Terracina is directly on top of the ancient forum. Remarkably, the ground level has remained almost unchanged since antiquity, and the piazza still has its original Roman pavement. On one side of the piazza, overlooking the ancient highway, is the Duomo, or cathedral. As we see it, the Duomo dates to the 11th century. But, as you've probably guessed, it's actually much older. The Duomo of Terracina was originally a temple, possibly dedicated to Augustus and Roma. Though the temple itself is now almost invisible, the steps of the medieval church are the original temple steps, and the columns of the medieval portico were salvaged from other Roman buildings around the forum. A nice example of the continuity that has kept the little piazza in front of the Duomo at the heart of Terracina for more than 2,000 years. Number 4. The Roman theaters of Naples. The streets of Naples have always reminded me of the slot canyons of the American West. The buildings on either side, stuccoed and painted a half-dozen shades of ochre and russet and tan, blend into cliffs that loom and lean over streets so narrow that the sun never seems to touch them. But there is a method to all this architectural madness, for many of these streets still follow the orderly lines of buried Roman predecessors. And in a few parts of the cityscape, other reminders of antiquity surface. One of the most remarkable survivals is located on a narrow street bounded by 4- and 5-story buildings. In the middle of the block, 2 brick arches span the street. There's nothing unusual about that. Plenty of Neapolitan streets are crossed by arches, but these particular arches are made of Roman brick. And if you look closely at the walls of nearby buildings, you can see ancient stonework peering out from beneath the stucco. The walls and arches belong to one of Naples' ancient theaters. In the Roman era, Naples had 2 theaters, which stood side by side. The arrangement seems to have resembled that at Pompeii, shown in this picture, where a large uncovered theater adjoined a smaller roofed one. Both of Naples' theaters were famous in the Roman era, when the city was a favorite vacation spot of the Roman elite. It was in one of these theaters, in fact, that Nero gave his first public performance. The brick arches were buttresses, built against the outer wall of the large theater, likely after earthquake damage made the structure unstable. More remains are visible along the adjacent streets, several of which follow the curve of the theater walls. Some of the larger theater's seats were recently uncovered in a nearby courtyard, and visitors can explore other parts of the building by booking guided tours. Number 3. San Paolo Maggiore. Only a few blocks from the Roman Theater of Naples is the imposing church of San Paolo Maggiore. The Baroque facade is one of Naples' finest, characterized by an elaborate series of panels and pilasters. The pattern is broken by 2 battered columns, tied to the rest of the facade with stone beams. These columns are the only visible remnants of the temple into which San Paolo was built. This temple, dedicated to the divine twins Castor and Pollux, was built in the early imperial era. Like the Duomo of Terracina, it became a church in late antiquity, and was extensively remodeled in later centuries. The facade of the temple, however, remained almost intact until the 17th century. It was much admired by Renaissance architects, and especially by Palladio. But in 1688, an earthquake destroyed the ancient facade. no attempt was made to rebuild it, and the 2 surviving columns, the ones still visible today, were simply left in place. Number 2. Santa Costanza. And now, at last, we come back to Rome. Rome has Europe's finest collection of ancient churches. Nowhere else can you visit so many churches that have been used continuously for 16 or 17 centuries. And, although most of these buildings have been remodeled many times, a remarkable number have retained their original shape. Even among this select group, one of Rome's oldest churches stands out. Santa Costanza is a short bus ride beyond Rome's ancient walls, near the 3rd milestone of the ancient Via Nomentana. Everything about the church is a little strange. Most of Rome's early Christian churches are long and narrow basilicas, but Santa Costanza is circular. Even more unusually, it stands beside the ruins of another, larger church, built about the same time. The plot thickens further when we discover that Santa Costanza never existed. The reason behind all these peculiarities becomes clear once you enter the church and see the replica of a great porphyry sarcophagus gleaming behind the altar. Santa Costanza did not begin life as a church. Originally, it was a mausoleum for the daughters of Constantine. It was built in the middle of the 4th century, possibly, in one of those little ironies of history, by the pagan emperor Julian. Both of Constantine's daughters were interred in the mausoleum soon after their deaths. The church beside the mausoleum fell into ruin during the early Middle Ages. But the mausoleum, smaller and more manageable, was preserved, which is why some of its splendid ceiling mosaics still survive. The building soon became a church in its own right. The porphyry sarcophagi of the 2 princesses were removed during the Renaissance. One ended up in St. Peter's Basilica, the other in the Vatican Museums. But visitors can still see a replica of the larger sarcophagus in its original location, suffused with light reflecting from the ancient mosaics. Number 1. Santa Maria degli Angeli. I didn't mention this wonderful church in the first video, only because I planned, as I still plan, to do a video tour of the entire building. But until I get back to Rome, a tantalizing preview couldn't hurt. From the outside, as you can see in this picture, Santa Maria degli Angeli has an oddly unfinished appearance, as though the entrance had been cut through a random brick wall. This, as it happens, is more or less the truth. Santa Maria degli Angeli is built into the central hall of the Baths of Diocletian, the largest Roman bath ever constructed. Like all the grand imperial thermae, this was nothing less than an entertainment complex, with ball courts, exercise yards, lecture halls, ornamental fountains, and food stalls arrayed around the central building that contained the pools. That building, paved and paneled with marble, vaults aglow with glass mosaic, was suitably gargantuan, with space for thousands of bathers. In the early Middle Ages, after the aqueducts were cut and Rome's population shrank to a tiny fraction of its imperial million, the Baths of Diocletian fell into ruin. Like most of Rome's great buildings, they were gradually stripped of their statues in marble. But the colossal concrete shell of the central hall survived and was converted into a church between 1563 and 1566. The architect was Michelangelo, but since the great artist died during construction, and since the church was extensively remodeled in the 18th century, what we see today doesn't really reflect his design. After entering through the surviving wall of the rotunda that held the central caldarium, or hot room, we pass through the vestibule, formerly the tepidarium, or warm room, and into the colossal frigidarium. The Roman floor lies well below the modern one, and the original decorations of the concrete vault have vanished. But that vault survives, as do the huge columns of Egyptian granite that adorned it. With the exception of the Pantheon, no place gives a better idea of the lost grandeur of Imperial Rome. In the description, you'll find a link to the interactive map that shows the location of every building mentioned in both this video and its predecessor. You'll also see a link to a preview of my forthcoming book, naked statues, fat gladiators, and war elephants, frequently asked questions about the ancient Greeks and Romans, which viewers of this video might enjoy. I plan to keep making new videos, so please consider subscribing, and of course, feel free to like this video if you found it informative. In the meantime, stay tuned, and as always, thanks for watching.